We have some very unfortunate news coming in from Ahmedabad. Air India flight AI 171 has actually crashed right outside the perimeter of the airport. It was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. It had 242 people on board, 230 of them passengers, 10 cabin crew, and two pilots. Uh, we don't know much about it at this point. What we do know for a fact, and this is according to data from FlightRadar24 that we've been tracking, is that the aircraft ascended to an altitude of 625 feet. Thereafter, it fell to the ground. We know that the pilot gave a mayday call within seconds after takeoff, which is highly unusual if we are to go by what experts are saying. But at this point, we have more questions than we have answers. And today we have Ian Petchenik, who is the Director of Communications at FlightRadar24 and is also the co-host of App Talk podcast with us, who will help us understand what this accident is all about and what their understanding on this matter is so far. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. I understand that this is a very busy time for you, and I appreciate you taking time to speak to us.
Thank
Um,
you for having me.
I'll just, I mean, to begin with, I just wanted an understanding from you, from the data that you've collated, from what the data, I mean, the data that you've assessed, what you know so far about this crash that has happened right outside the Ahmedabad airport, and what are the questions that come to your mind from the data that you've seen?
Sure. So what we know so far is very little about the departure of the aircraft from the airport. We know that the takeoff roll was conducted. We know that the aircraft became airborne, and based on the data, that's really all we know. Data stops pretty quickly after the aircraft became airborne, which tells us something in and of itself. There are a bit of coverage gaps on the eastern side of the airfield, and those are visible in the data. But on the western side of the airfield, we historically have no coverage gaps. So we would expect to see coverage of that aircraft even beyond where we're seeing data. So that's the first thing that tells us that something went wrong. Based on the visual evidence that we've seen from the scene, we can start to understand that there was an issue that affected the aircraft. What that issue was as yet, we do not know.
Okay, I understand. So, based on the data that you've seen so far, this is up until the point when the aircraft rose to 625 feet, which is the highest that it went. And then it began, of course, descending at a rate of 475 feet per minute, and it finally hit the ground. Till the point that it was at its highest altitude, according to the data, do you see any sort of an anomaly? Do you think that there was anything off in the data that you saw till the point it went up to 625 feet?
So the data doesn't really bear out any anomalies. There's not much data to go on. There's only a few data points, unfortunately. So we can't really conclude anything from the ADS-B data at this point. Normally, we would have an extensive amount of data to look into and be able to perhaps point in the right direction. But because data stopped from the aircraft, that tells us that there was an issue, either with the coverage, which we don't know at this point if that was the case, or with the aircraft itself. And based on the visual evidence from the scene, it seems like that may be the case.
Right. And as I was just saying that we've been following what Flight Radar 24 has been putting out. One of the updates actually in your blog and also on your Twitter platform was that the aircraft covered the entire runway 23, about 11,500 feet, and then it took off, right? We also know
Yes.
what the speed of the aircraft was. Does that indicate that this takeoff, until the point that at least the aircraft sort of became airborne, that till that point everything was normal?
It indicates to us that there was nothing definitively abnormal.
Mhm.
So the data that we have shows that it was a all all points to a standard takeoff roll and a standard departure. What we don't know is what happened shortly after departure that led to the aircraft crash.
I'm sure you've been following it very closely, not just in terms of data, but also the visuals that have been coming out, and also what the news platforms have been putting out, the images
Mhm.
and visuals from the ground. And as you may have seen, that it's actually hit some buildings right next to the airport. Right, so there are some casualties that are also expected on the ground. We don't have a clear picture on how many deaths have happened so far, and this is a sensitive situation. So of course, we'll have to wait for confirmation. But looking at that one video that I mean has been sort of doing the rounds on social media, the aircraft rises to a certain point. It doesn't bank to the left or the right. It looks pretty stable, and then it goes down. I mean, when the news broke out, within the first half an hour, 45 minutes, two, three pilots actually who've flown this aircraft before, they said that their guess was that there may have been bird ingestion on both sides, both engines basically of the aircraft. That could have been one reason. Another person also told us that he suspected that there may have been some issue with the hydraulics, right? Because of which, I mean, it may have impacted the movement of the flaps, and the aircraft basically wasn't able to get the lift that it needed. Any looking at the video itself, if you've seen that video, I'm not aware if you have. Do you have any insights that you can share with us?
I mean, there are certainly a number of avenues that investigators are going to be exploring. I think that the video itself, to my mind, does not have enough. Um, the resolution is not high enough to make any definitive statement about a possible bird strike, or the position of the flaps, or anything like that. But those are all certainly avenues for exploration for the investigators. And helpfully, the aircraft, the empennage of the aircraft seems intact based on visual evidence that we've seen, which is where the crash protected memory recorders are located. So hopefully investigators will not have a difficult time recovering those devices and then analyzing them to give them a better sense of what was happening on board the aircraft at the time.
Right. And speaking about the flaps, actually, and again, I'm going by the video, and you say that it's not a very high resolution video, and we don't have very definitive visuals basically that tell us anything at all, really. But again, now from the bird ingestion theory, if you look at the experts basically that are commenting on this matter, they're saying, and this is not specifically, this question is not specifically about what happened in this particular instance, but I'm trying to understand, and for the sake of the understanding of the readers and the viewers, they're saying that the flaps were actually never sort of deployed, right? They were not extended, they were not lowered. Now, what I want to understand is, and that's what they're saying, is appears when the aircraft is airborne. Uh, Now, what I was curious about was that the flaps have to be extended even as the aircraft is on the tarmac, basically on the runway, about to take off, right? Because you can't really take off without the flaps having been deployed. I also understand that when the flaps, if let's say, and there have been two, three videos that again were being shared. Someone had actually sent one to me, another person who was basically interested with about aviation issues, saying that look at this video. It was from 8 years back, and basically the flap was not deployed. The aircraft begins on the runway. I mean, it picks up speed, and then midway the flaps are deployed. And the understanding was that there's a takeoff configuration warning that you get if the flaps are not deployed at one point, and then technically and ideally that if you get the more warning mid takeoff, you should ideally abort takeoff, right? If you have some wisdom on this, if you can share with us how it works exactly, the deployment of the flaps, and if the flaps are not deployed, what happens then? It would really help us understand this matter.
Sure. So not speaking specifically about whether or not the flaps are deployed on this particular aircraft, but generally speaking, there is a takeoff configuration warning for the 787. And that will include a variety of things that all of the parameters, runway length, air temperature, assumed air temperature, uh, you know, distance available depending on conditions, takeoff settings, including flaps and power settings on the engines. All of those things will go into calculations. And if they don't match the current configuration of the aircraft, there will be a takeoff configuration warning. So that's certainly something that is available to the pilots and something that investigators will look into to see how was the aircraft configured when it departed, and was there any mitigating factors that forced them to either operate with a different configuration, or that told them the aircraft was configured in a certain way and it perhaps wasn't. It's very early days at this point to understand what happened, but there are certainly some clear avenues for investigation.
I understand. Thanks. That really helps understand the issue. One thing you can from the video, you can, and it's been verified that this is in fact a video of the AI 171 before the crash. One thing you can think is very clear that the landing gear had not been retracted until the point that it reached the height that it did. Is it normal for an aircraft to have the landing gear still not retracted, basically, even when it has reached a height of 625 feet? Because people are saying that that may have some sort of a role to play when it comes to the drag of the aircraft at that point, and maybe if it had been retracted, they may have had more time to sort of figure out what to do with the aircraft in that position.
Yeah, I mean, if so, as we understand it now, as I believe has been reported from the DGCA, that there was a Mayday call issued. The fact that the landing gear wasn't raised, that to me points to a high workload environment on the flight deck.
Mhm.
And when you are experiencing a high workload environment, the raising of landing gear may not be the most pressing issue. So at the time, without knowing all that was happening on the flight deck, I can't say in a normal situation the landing gear would come up uh, once there's a positive rate of climb. It's basically as soon as you're off the runway, you know you're climbing away from the runway, the gear will come up. So for the gear to have stayed down, that's an indication of a non-normal workload. And then the question becomes is what was happening? And certainly
Right.
something that'll come out as part of the investigation.
Right. I mean, you mentioned that it was a very high workload environment. It's, as I understand, it's highly unusual for Mayday to be called at such a short, in such a short time span, right? Usually, there are other basically things that you rely on. There are some other basically fallback options. I understand that. I mean, do you think that in that instance, in that moment, there may have been some catastrophic failure that gave a very clear indication to the pilot, to the captain and the co-pilot, that they were in a emergency situation?
I mean, certainly Mayday is not declared without good reason. And so that certainly says to me that something went very wrong on the aircraft or with the aircraft. And that certainly gives us a fresh insight into what happened.
Right. In fact, I'm not sure if you've seen the visuals. One person was able to walk away from this crash, right? Now we're to believe that this person was in seat 11A. In fact, a person who was in seat 12A is a former chief minister of Gujarat, one of the states in India, and he's died. This person has just spoken to TV channels, and he said that 30 seconds into the flight, he heard a very loud bang, after which the aircraft started descending. Uh, if you were to take a guess, and I wouldn't want you to hazard a guess, basically that sort of is in any way indicative of what may have happened. What could such a loud bang be? I mean, what could be the reason for a bang?
The reason for a bang is numerous, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the cause of a bang.
Mhm.
If you're hearing a loud noise right around takeoff, it could be anything from bird strikes to a mechanical failure or anything. I mean, it could be so many things that I don't want to speculate on specifically what this might have been.
Got it. I understand. Uh, Would you be able to recall any such incidents? And we know that this is the first crash that a Dreamliner, aircraft basically has witnessed. Uh, would you be able to recall any such major incidents that a Boeing 787 has been involved in the previous instances? And anything to do? We know that there were two instances actually where there was slat failure, And if I'm if I'm correct about this, the slats are of course on the front of the wing and the flaps are on the rear of the wing. uh, could you recall any such instances that have happened before that may throw some light on this particular incident?
I would hesitate to draw any parallels at the moment to any other incidents with the particular, 787 or with any other aircraft. We just don't know enough at this point.
Right. And if you were to not compare this crash with any other incident, what would you say has been the biggest safety incident involving a Dreamliner so far?
I mean, the early days with the battery issues, I mean,
Mhm.
were something that was very closely scrutinized by regulators and by Boeing itself. But the 787 has had some teething problems, I guess is a way to put it, with fit and function issues throughout its lifespan so far. But it has been a very safe and reliable flying machine. So this is, as you mentioned, this is the first hull loss of a 787.
Right. One of the things that we in India have actually, there's been a debate for a while now that a lot of our airports are actually situated in very crowded areas inside city limits, right? Of course, some of the older airports, you can't possibly do much about it, but the newer airports that have come up, they're usually outside city limits. What that does, of course, is if there's an incident like this, an unfortunate incident like this, there are fatalities and there's damage, of course, on the ground as well when the crash happens. Other than that, the fact that if there's a garbage dump near an airport, or if there's an abattoir near an airport, there's also more birds in the sky. Do you think that India particularly has, this problem compared to most other or many other countries that are, doing well in terms of aviation safety?
I'm not sure if it's a unique to India issue.
Mhm.
It's certainly unique to, or not unique, but it's certainly an issue that arises when you have airports that are either older and have expanded, where cities have been built up or communities have been built up around existing airports. And it's also certainly a case in a lot of places where you have an airport that is being built in areas that there is not a large open space around the runway, where you have either a community or something else that's abutting the airport, whether that's the community being developed around the airport or the airport being developed next to community, depends on the location. But it's certainly not unique to India, though, because of the growth of Indian aviation, especially over the last few years, we've seen a lot of airports expand where it's brought the runway in closer proximity to some of the communities that surround the airport itself.
Right. Ian, could you also tell us a little bit about how Flight Radar 24 collects its data, right? There's, of course, ADSB involved,
Mhm.
and there are transponders, and people, in fact, even private individuals can host these receivers at their premises. Could you tell us a little bit about how Flight Radar 24 sort of collects and collates this data? And once an incident like this happens, right? Do you then basically look at multiple sources and then you basically try and map what happened exactly, and you get more granular details that you wouldn't have otherwise in the due course of a regular flight?
Sure. So the way FlightRadar24 works is that the aircraft themselves send out, and we'll just use ADSB data as the generalization because there are certain other types of data as well. But the data that comes out of the aircraft includes things like its position, altitude, speed, heading, so on and so forth. And that data is collated, taken by our receivers, and then collated by us with information about the aircraft itself from our database, schedule information, and things like that. And that's what you see on the FlightRadar 24 service, whether it's live tracking or looking at historical data for a specific aircraft or a specific flight. When there's an incident like this, we will process the granular data that we receive. So when you're watching FlightRadar24, you're not seeing all of the ADS-B data that is received by the FlightRadar24 network, purely because data is sent from the aircraft about once a second. And the number of data points from all of the aircraft that we're tracking, if we were to show all of that data in real time, would just be uh, a a technological nightmare to display on the website and still have it function. So what we do is we display it at a lower level of granularity, depending on whether it's the aircraft is on the ground. So you'll see positions close together. If the aircraft's turning, you'll see positions close together. But if the aircraft is in cruise, you'll see those positions spread out because the aircraft's heading and altitude aren't changing. So with an incident, we'll take the granular data that we're receiving and process that for the entirety of the flight. So whatever data we have for that particular flight, we'll go ahead and process that and see what that data is able to tell us. Unfortunately, even processing the granular data in this case did not reveal much more information than we had initially.
And why do you think that could be?
Well, in this particular case, the aircraft was not airborne for very long. Watching the video, the aircraft was in the air for about 30 seconds, and the aircraft stopped displaying data not long after takeoff. So whether that's an issue of very low level coverage or an issue where the aircraft stopped transmitting ADS-B data, either because of an engine failure or an electrical failure, that's something that we'll hopefully learn as the investigation continues.
You just spoke about an investigation. Could you just give us a quick insight into after an incident like this happens? And of course, this is specific to every country, and different countries have different regulators and investigation bodies when it comes to air crashes. It's a very complex process, right? An investigation after an air crash. Could you just quickly run through what are the steps of an investigation after a crash like this happens? We understand that the NTSB has already commented that they'll send a team to India to investigate this, and I understand that there are people. I mean, there are Portuguese people, there are Canadians, there are British people. So all of these countries will also likely send their investigation teams to India to assess what is happening. But if you could just please quickly run us through the trajectory of the investigation after an air crash uh, happens.
Sure. So this investigation will be led by the Indian Air Crash Investigation Authority. So as part of what's called ICAO Annex 13, which is the overriding agreement between nations that governs how crashes are investigated, parties to the investigation can be designated, and that will often include the party for the state of manufacture. So in this case, it will be the US NTSB. So they will send accredited representatives to assist in the investigation however they can. The state of manufacture for the engines, which in this case is also the US, will take part. Boeing will obviously be a party to the investigation. General Electric will be a party to the investigation. And what will happen is the Indian investigators will be in charge of the investigation, but they will rely on other parties as necessary to assist in any way, whether that's evidence collection, evidence analysis, analysis of the flight data recorder or cockpit voice recorder, what have you. They will be leading that investigation. And you'll likely see a preliminary report not long after, perhaps within a month or so, that lays out the factual information as it's known thus far. And then we'll likely wait at least a year. And probably longer for a final report that establishes what investigators believe to be the probable cause of the crash.
Right. And how long do you think it typically takes to access data from the black box after its recovery?
Hopefully, the data recorders from this aircraft are in good condition. And after those recorders are brought back to a lab, wherever that lab might be in this case, they can hopefully be accessed relatively quickly. And because of the type of memory recorder that is available, hopefully that data can be read out and analyzed relatively quickly.
Ian, Boeing has had its fair share of problems. We all know about it. The Boeing 737 MAX, of course, has had multiple incidents. Boeing has a new CEO who's on many occasions spoken about how they need to do better and better in terms of safety. What do you think this crash means for Boeing and the future?
I think it's far too early to say whether or not that this is a Boeing issue, whether it's a 787 issue, whether it's an issue that was very specific to this location at this time of day. So I think it's incumbent on Boeing to offer their support to the investigation, which they've done absolutely, as they have done in the past, and I think it will take some time to understand what has happened. But certainly, if it turns out that this is a Boeing issue, they'll obviously need to take ownership of that. But like I said, I think it's far too early to rush to speculate on whether or not it is in fact one.
Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. You've been a great help, and you've given insights that help us understand this issue better and better. And if you don't mind, we'd like to be in touch with you over this so that we can keep understanding the issue better even in the coming days. But thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.